car he obviously likes is the accelerator. I hope he temporizes it with the brake as often as possible. Armaan Ebrahim.
Thank you. Very good morning to everyone. I would first like to take a minute and thank everyone from the Don Bosco's Past Pupils Association for inviting me to be part of such an elite group of speakers. I mean, everyone here has lived through so much and achieved so much, as we can hear them say, and to have me here is great. It's a great honor. I'm sorry, I'm just going to read my speech through, so if you don't mind. But the secret to success, I guess. Well, the word success can be quite perspective. Would I call myself successful in racing? Not sure if I can say that right now, as I am still working hard to achieve the goals that I've set out for myself. But for sure, the secret to being successful is in making yourself a success in what you do are the same fundamentals that apply to one and all. And to me, these few points make a big difference, and that's hard work, discipline, self-belief, and the most important one for me is you have to be passionate about what you do, because that's the only time you're going to want to learn every single aspect of that business or the sport. Keeping that in mind, I mean, I've been racing professionally for just over 10 years now, and when I was growing up, racing was never really part of the plan. Even though I absolutely loved just watching cars go round and round, but one day an opportunity came about, and before I knew it, a couple of months later, I was sitting in a go-kart workshop in Malaysia during my summer break, working there from about 7 a.m. to p.m. just to get the opportunity to go racing every weekend. So my introduction to motorsport was probably the hardest part, at least for me personally, because it wasn't just a straightforward thing where a kid and his dad just bring some money, pay the team, and it was like, hey, let's go racing. The deal was that the team would train as well as give me a drive, but I had to work at the shop through the week. Now, when they offered me this deal, I thought to myself, life can't get any better. I was spending time with the team, around go-karts all the time, and in a different country, so it all sounded fantastic. But I'll tell you what, it was a lot more intense. I was staying with a family that I didn't know or even understand. Had no clue what laundry was at the time. Had to learn how to adapt to various things, that I just wasn't used to. So it was basically a culture shock. So at 13, the driving bit was the easiest part, but things like cleaning 30 to 40 go-karts as soon as I got there, or even the workshop, sometimes even the toilet was something that I couldn't get used to. But nevertheless, those months went past, and I competed in a bunch of races. I got some good results. Learned a lot about the ins and outs of a go-kart, and then basically had a reasonable understanding about what motorsport, professional racing was all about. Once I got back home, I was sure of what I wanted to do, and I mean, even if it meant doing some of the dirty work that came along the way. And thankful enough, both my parents, even though I was so young, were very supportive, and I got the thumbs up to pursue motorsports as a career. So the following year, as you saw my profile there, I followed on by winning the national championship in the cars and karts, and even in Asia. And then I decided to progress on to the international arena in motorsports, and I competed when I was 15. I competed in the Formula BMW Championship at the time, and I won the BMW Motorsports Scholarship Award. So at that time things looked smooth sailing. Everything was just falling in place. It was a lot of fun, and it was pure fun. But it's only when you start hitting a small rough patch that do the butterflies kick into their stomach. Now the circumstances meant that I had to travel to all sorts of places, and okay, at that time my geography wasn't as good, so I hadn't heard of them. But and traveling alone there, and sometimes not knowing whether the guy I'd spoken to from the team was even going to turn up was a bit a little nerve-wracking. But you always have these ups and downs in racing. Where questions like, are you going to have a problem, or what if there's a crash? If things just don't work out with the team, or you keep going to yourself, what's going to happen? But it's easy when you're in familiar surroundings, to just get through life. But it's only when you're alone and you have no one to lean on that you find your true inner capability. And this is where the background helps. In school too, I think we were in the system for 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. just to deal with ourselves and only our friends, and you had to battle through classes. And this helped me deal, but this, later on helped me deal with such situations. When I think about those days, one of the main factors that helped me was discipline. And that was one of the main things that was installed into my system at a very early age. I joined school. I started in Don Bosco and right from the start at low kindergarten, and I was only there till the 7th grade. But at the time, I would get disciplined quite at regular intervals. I remember I would start the year at the back row, but for some reason by the 5th grade I was always in the front, enough for the teacher to just put a walking stick on my wrist. But I only realized later on how effective it would be. Once I went out on my own. And for that, I have to thank all those who taught me. Another thing that I am very appreciative about is that the school always believed in hard work and pushing boundaries. I remember when I used to play cricket in school, and as you heard, my dad was good, and so I thought, I have a bit of a talent, and I thought I was pretty confident. I thought I was pretty decent, but never really that interested where I would give it my all. So when it came about to selections for a match or a tournament, it was always a guy who I wasn't necessarily better, but he worked hard and he showed a lot more interest in the game, and who got picked, and he would get picked. And so at the time I was young, rash, and I couldn't understand throw tantrum, and couldn't get my head around it. But again, I only did once I started racing, and I was one of the lucky ones to actually convert my passion into my career. So in school you meet and understand fellow students from varieties of cultures, society, and backgrounds, and the outstanding factor is the simplicity and innocence that existed. I can say one thing for Don Bosco: the system allowed you to stretch the limit, but within reasonable boundaries. And if you did overstep them, then everyone knows that you paid the price for it. But the best part being that some of the boys from then are still my closest group of friends, and that really means something to me. In motorsports, you have to have the desire to push the limit further and further. Every lap you're out there, you're on track. You always want to redefine the limit, but what happens when you go that little bit too far? Times like you may not be around, to know the difference in that. And in this sense, it's the awareness that there is always a limit to where you can or where you can go or what you can do at that given space of time is so important. I'm definitely proud to have been a part of this institution, and I would really like to thank all the teachers, the fathers, the staff, and the faculty for helping us move forward in life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Armaan. As you can see, he drove right through that speech. Kind of person who's impatient talking about success. He just likes to get down to it. Just do it, as the advertising slogan says. But what a talent out there. A round of applause. Right, we have just 2 more speakers, and we are slightly in excess of our time. But imagine we've been at this for over 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and it seems like again speed. It seems like we've just started it a few minutes back. It's now my privilege to introduce to you another person who is also in an allied field of automobile. In fact, let me start with one of his hobbies. I think racing is one of his hobbies, car racing. He's an FIA racing driver's license holder himself. So if he wasn't what he was, he might have been on the track racing. But then destiny had other things in mind for him, and he is a veteran in the auto industry, 30 years in that industry. He's worked in many parts of the world, Europe, US of course, Europe, Asia. He did his doctorate in aerospace engineering and then an MS Management of Technology. And then he was with the General Motors Research Laboratories in Detroit. He led the research and development part of the GM Fiat Alliance in Europe. Returned to India in 2001 and joined the Tata Motors, the passenger cars, where he kind of refurbished or resurrected, shall we say, the Indica, launched the Indigo and the Messina. He had a big role to play in initiating the Nano, the Vista, the Manza, the Area, all this till 2005, over 4 or 5 years. And then he became the vice chairman of Ashok Leyland. where he played a very huge role, and we've seen his name in the newspapers a number of times in that capacity. He was responsible for the JV for light vehicles with Nissan. He's also the science advisory, he's also a member of the Science Advisory Council of the Prime Minister's Office, and is a scientific advisor to the Committee of the Cabinet. And he's now chairman of Celeris Technologies. He also teaches as a professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Chennai. That, ladies and gentlemen, is Dr. V. Sumantran.
Thank you, Sashi. Fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Let me start by also commending the organizers for such a wonderful event, such a grand scale of event on behalf of Don Bosco. I would also like to especially commend them for the choice of this venue. What a brilliant choice, a magnificent building to be in, and I make special mention of this for a reason. This wonderful building, which is probably one of the most important contributions to, shall I say, the commercial architecture of Chennai, was the product of a Boscoite, a fellow of a classmate of ours from the 75 batch. Verghese Jacob was the head of programs for ITC and was, in a way, singularly responsible for the architecture and the development of this facility. Sadly, we lost Verghese a few months ago to an ailment that he had been suffering from for several months. But there is a wonderful story about what he did to persist with his conviction of what this building should be. As is wont today in India, it is quite commonplace for us when we want to undertake a particularly large enterprise to seek foreign assistance. So, without exception for this building as well, foreign architects were called upon because this was to be done on a very, very grand scale. Verghese was horrified when he had seen the first plans of what was intended to be built, because this was, after all, to be the Grand Chola, to represent the architectural traditions of the Chola period. And what came from these foreign architects was no doubt grand edifices, but frankly had little to do with the traditions and the legacy of Chola or even Tamil culture. And so he literally had to completely tear up the plans, and he took all these architects on a tour of all the notable landmarks around Tamil Nadu to get them to feel and see what Chola architecture was all about. And out of that result, we have this building today, and truly, both local people as well as visitors will be impressed by the fact that it is true to its traditions and yet tastefully and elegantly done. And so once again, another celebrity from Don Bosco. I'd like to share a few comments in the vein of what has gone on earlier today. Yes, Don Bosco has been important for all of us, and yes, I too, Anthony, spent 13 long years at Don Bosco, entering the portals of Don Bosco at lower kindergarten and staying all the way to matriculation. And yes, through this period we saw the values, the sense of the experiences that Don Bosco had to share for us, the sense of curiosity it imbibed in all of us, and very importantly, as I think Y.G. Mahindran also mentioned, the kinds of expectations that were held for us. People like Father Mallon. I still remember Father Mallon. I mean, I'm probably one of the last batches to still have recall an interaction with Father Mallon, and of course the wonderful teachers we've had. We've often talked today about Mr. Selvadare, Mr. Subbarao. It's a pity Mr. Selvadare couldn't be here. He should have listened to the so many tributes that have been paid to him. I think in the spirit again of what life is all about, I'd rather not so much talk about success, but rather talk about experiences. As a third generation engineer in the family, it was perhaps expected that I would have mechanical inclinations. But fortunately, these were encouraged both at home and at school. In fact, I can remember in the back benches, fortunately for us, Mr. Salvador never asked to see our exercise books, because in my exercise books, right past the section where we had to describe all the possible minerals one could mine in Kalgoorlie and Coolgardie of Australia, were all the sketches of the future Mercedeses and future Porsches and future Ferraris. Mr. Salvador never asked to see my book. Thankfully, I escaped. But this was a passion that was ingrained in me at a very young age. And again, as Armaan has indicated, this is important in life, that we need to be passionate about things, and there must be something that truly consumes us. And I'm sure every one of the panelists here would have their own story to tell. Vijay with tennis, each of us consumed by a passion, and therefore something that drives us towards what we want to do. Don Bosco in those days was also noted for giving students a sense of competitiveness. This also Y.G. Mahendran referred to. State ranks were something that was expected. A good friend of mine, Carl Ludwigsen, wrote a very interesting, the definitive history book of Porsche. And the title of the book was Excellence Was Expected. You know, in Don Bosco of those days, excellence was expected. And the fact that you would strive for a state rank was not something that you felt exceptionally proud about, because you were just one amongst many. And in fact, I remember in the pre-university class in Loyola, of the first 10 state ranks in the state for the pre-university examination, 7 of us were from the Don Bosco Loyola. But again, there was no sense of celebration in those days, because when you had a 7th rank in the state, you didn't think about being the 7th rank in the state, but you thought about the 6 others who'd beaten you to, and you were really consumed with that kind of competitiveness. And I think it is important that the school provided an environment where excellence was something that was expected, and it encouraged people to really do their best. Of course, this was a boon to me in terms of subsequently moving on to other education places like the IIT and so on, where again, that sense of being able to compete with some of the best contemporaries was a very valuable trait, and therefore helped us move along in our respective careers. I was fortunate again, a bit like Armaan, to make a career out of my hobby. And so I ended up working with, starting to work with General Motors Research in the US, in Detroit. In those days, GM Research was the equivalent of Bell Labs. We really did the most outrageous things in the industry, and we had tremendous freedom to enjoy what we wanted to do. And it was a career that I was, again, helped and encouraged by my superiors, who recognized a sense of interest and were willing to push me along. And as long as you were willing to stretch yourself, you found opportunities expanded, which in turn led to more and more experiences. And this sense of never being satisfied and always seeking more experience was easy, because it was not work, it was hobby. I was doing something that was my hobby. And again, through this, I could really recall, as clear as day, Mr. Salvador teaching us English poetry and reciting the famous poem Ulysses from Lord Tennyson. Life piled on life were all too little. You know? It seems like with all that you want to do, there is not enough time to do what you want to do. And so the sense that you are always roaming with a hungry heart, that you had this insatiable appetite for more knowledge, more experience, was something that you related to. And I can still recall, as clear as day, the voice of Mr. Salvador going through these English lessons for us. Several years later, it was a fortunate call for me to come back to India. Mr. Ratan Tata had asked if I would come back to lead the car business for Tata Motors, and which Indian could decline such a wonderful opportunity. So it was a good chance to come back to India. Of course, 10 years ago, the state of technology, the state of preparedness in India, particularly in advanced technologies like in the automotive or the aerospace industries, was rather limited. And compared to the best of what a Mercedes or a BMW or a Porsche or a GM would have, we had more primitive tools, and certainly for our people, much less experience. And yet it was such a wonderful challenge to muster out of this, out of poorer resources and a less experienced crew, to challenge ourselves to really take on the best of all the world here, because today the Indian market is awash with just about every brand that you can choose. And that this group of young, motivated engineers, young men and women who had perhaps hardly had the kind of experience that their counterparts in Stuttgart or Tokyo or Detroit had, to start to seriously work from scratch, building new engines, new vehicles, new powertrains, new production systems, and to be able to close a gap of at least 60 years with just sheer effort and determination. The team that really helped put together products like, whether it was the Tata Nano or the Tata Indica Vista or whatever, were really young engineers with very, very raw talent. But yet, in a remarkably short period of time, they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps to learn and master the skills that were necessary to address complicated topics like crash safety and emission compliance and so on. And here again, I'm reminded again, going back to English poetry, and if Mr. Sarvodare was here, at least he would be impressed that some of his students remember English poetry that he taught.